Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and Ukraine. Well, today, in the last 24 hours, there have been a series of strikes, and quite literally within the last week or so, there have been repeated strikes on Russian assets in Sevastopol. Now, what we believe is happening is because the Ukrainians are seeing lack of success. The offensive south of Orikhiv, the Zaporizhia offensive designed to sever the land corridor, we are now seeing the Ukrainians, with the full support of the United States and the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, start to target very sensitive Russian assets in the Crimea. So is this a conciliatory prize for the Ukrainians? Difficult to say at this point. We do know that the Ukrainians have been unable to break through Russian lines in Zaporizhia. You're looking at those lines as we speak. Now, the strikes that occurred within the last 24 hours were at this locale. So this is the main Russian naval headquarters for its Black Sea fleet in this area. And it looks like the Ukrainians went after a number of targets, a number of cruise missiles, a number of Storm Shadow cruise missiles, possibly other systems were shot down by Russian forces. However, some missiles did get through and were able to strike Russian targets. Additionally, hardened targets were also struck with the Storm Shadow weapon system. And that attack, again, has all the hallmarks of direct NATO, United States participation. Prior to this conflict starting, the Ukrainians did not have that kind of capacity. In the strikes that we're watching now in Crimea, the strikes that we've seen take place against the Kilo-class diesel-electric submarine at dry dock, the amphibious warfare ship that was at dry dock, and now the direct attack on the naval headquarters of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in this area, to include going after an underground bunker. Again, all the signs that NATO is fully participating. Now, did the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, did the United States drop those Storm Shadow missiles against Russian targets? Some would say no. Some would argue possibly. Again, plausible deniability for the Ukrainians has already been established. How has that occurred? Well, because NATO, the United States, has said that it has refurbished Su-24s, Su-24s, ground strike aircraft with the ability to carry NATO weapon systems, cruise missiles. Now, NATO would argue that a Su-24 launched from western Ukraine, maintained very low altitude, and released the Storm Shadow missiles at range against those targets in Sevastopol. Is that what happened? Or is it possible that it was a U.S. asset that released munitions against those Russian targets? There is quite a bit of anger right now that the Ukrainians were not able to break through Russian lines and create this general rout of Russian forces in Zaporizhia. Not just the Ukrainians were hoping this would happen, but the Pentagon, the White House, specifically the White House, believed that the Ukrainian military was going to be able to do this, and it didn't. And I believe the White House would like this war to end, would like to be unshackled from the blackmail operation that continues with the Ukrainian intelligence service holding power over Joe Biden and his corrupt son, Hunter Biden. Make no mistake, the Ukrainians have damaging information, serious enough in which the Biden administration would write blank checks to the Ukrainians. $100 billion. $100 billion. You could rebuild Maui 50 times. Think about that for a second. And Maui is still in squalor, the town that burned down. But Ukraine is more important than Maui, clearly. And Zelensky was just at the White House, I assume, reminding Joseph Biden of his obligation. Because if that obligation is not fulfilled, then information most likely would be released. And again, that's why we're seeing what we're seeing. $100 billion. $100 billion exceeds the defense budget, the entire defense budget of nation states like the United Kingdom, Great Britain. We have given Ukraine more money and more defense material that exceeds the entire defense budget of the United Kingdom. Exceeds that of the entire defense budget of France. It exceeds the entire defense budget of the Russian Federation prior to the war. Get your head around that for a second. But again, back to the military aspect of this conflict. Again, what we're seeing, what we saw in Sevastopol, all the indicators are that that strike, again, has all the hallmarks of a strike carried out by the United States. And again, in all probability, we're going to see an uptick in strikes by the Ukrainians against very sensitive Russian targets. We may have even seen a strike take place near Moscow. Now, was this a direct strike with a cruise missile? No, it wasn't. In all probability, it was a drone system launched from the ground. But nonetheless, the Ukrainians are now aiming for targets within the vicinity of Moscow. So this war is not going to end anytime soon. And we're seeing the effects of this conflict reverberate around the world. Again, Armenia, Azerbaijan. We're now seeing the ethnic cleansing of all Armenians located in Nagorno-Karabakh, this area. I would like to try to gain some understanding, though. I obviously there are some fairly knowledgeable individuals who watch the program, and I'm trying to get my head around why on earth would a submarine commander, I believe a deputy commander of the submarine forces in the North Sea Fleet, was operationally in charge of Russian peacekeepers in Nagorno-Karabakh. Why would that occur? Why would that individual be in charge of Russian forces in this area? I don't get it, don't understand it, but apparently he was recently killed by an Azeri attack on a Russian peacekeeper vehicle, which ended up killing 4 to 5 Russian service members. Very strange. Strange indeed. And what's even more strange is, again, you have a tyrannical regime in Azerbaijan attacking a Western-style democracy in Armenia. Now, have they invaded Armenia yet? No, they haven't. And I'm not sure why the Armenians didn't try and threaten the Nakhchivan enclave, this area here. It would have been very difficult for the Azeris to defend that enclave. But this is over with. The Azeris have marched into Nagorno-Karabakh and are in the process of expelling 100,000 Armenians. Now, the regime in Baku is claiming that those Armenians are going to be treated with quote-unquote dignity and they will have rights. But seriously, no, not buying it. Don't think that's going to happen. And the Western nation states that so vehemently cover what's happening in Ukraine are absolutely silent about what is happening between Azerbaijan and Armenia. Again, a tyrannical dictatorship attacking a Western-style democracy. But I've talked about that before in another episode and the reasons behind that. And, at the end of the day, very difficult for the Armenians. You have Turkey with the full weight and power of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization directly supporting the Azeris. And then a marriage made in hell in which you have the Israelis directly supporting the Azeris as well, with massive amounts of military equipment. The Armenians lost a lot in the prior 2020 war and have not been able to recover its armed forces. The regime in Azerbaijan, with the full support of Turkey, with the full support of Israel, was able to reconstitute forces much quicker, and that's why they were able to launch said military operation against Nagorno-Karabakh as they did. So again, as we continue to watch the conflict change other conflicts, we expect that the war will escalate. At a certain point, the Russians are going to tire of very sensitive targets inside of the Russian Federation attacked by Ukrainian/NATO weapon systems. And make no mistake of it, Crimea is part of the Russian Federation, both in present context and, more importantly, historical. Crimea has always been part of the Russian Federation. That paradigm only changed in the 60s with the Soviet Union making what at the time was an internal decision. that had no ramifications on the Soviet Union. Now, obviously, things have changed, and the being of Crimea has changed as well. But the Russians aren't giving that up. Again, as I talked about before, the Russians will use tactical nuclear weapons before they lose Crimea. I have no doubt that would occur before they allow what will essentially now be a NATO client state dominate the Black Sea through the possession of the Crimean Peninsula. You have to understand, this is not an option for the Russians. It is something that is not even on the table. And right now, at least what we're hearing coming out of Kiev, that is ultimately the goal. And before the conflict even started, right? Before the conflict even started, military leaders in Ukraine, political leaders in Ukraine, often talked about retaking the Crimean Peninsula. It was going to happen. And now it's happening. But again, as we watch the conflict, we will continue to report, again, status quo on the ground. The Zaporizhzhia offensive has failed. We think things will go into a stagnant phase for some time. We will continue to see the war continue. We will probably see the Ukrainians make renewed efforts towards Bakhmut with light infantry. They will save up their mechanized formations, attempt to try and rebuild those mechanized brigades that were destroyed in the recent Zaporizhzhia offensive. And I don't expect anything until the Ukrainians receive more Abrams main battle tanks, which are on the way. And then finally some of those brigades are reconstituted. Then possibly the Ukrainians will launch further operations. But in the meantime, the Russian military is continuing to build up as well. And we anticipate within a not too long period of time from today, the Russian military, 5 months, 6 months, 1 year from now, is going to be far, far larger than what it is today. And then the question is going to be, what is the Russians going to do with that capability? So, more to come. Thank you for joining us. And as always, have a good day.